So now that the airlines have been given an enormous bailout from Congress, would-be passengers are demanding their money back. This has the executives there wondering about their ability to stay afloat, even though they got all that cash. But given their enormous carbon footprint, should they be able to do business as usual after the crisis is over? We're going to ask that question to our next guest, climate reporter Alexander Kaufman. Alexander Kaufman is a reporter at HuffPost, writing about climate change, environmental policy, and the politics of life on a warming planet. Alexander, thanks for joining us here today on ACT-TV.
Happy to be here.
So, did I get that right? Airlines are coming under pressure now to give cash refunds to people who had booked flights. Can you talk about why they're hesitant to give those refunds? And, if they were just they're just giving all this money. They just want to
Sure.
pocket the money, or what do they want to do with that money if they don't want to refund it to people?
So the real problem here, and I've been hearing this increasingly since that story published actually, is that there are a handful of airlines that are kind of forcing people into canceling their flights. They basically say that we will provide you a refund if we cancel your flight, and they claim that that a lot of these customers are actually putting marking cancellation on the website, thereby locking them into a credit situation instead of a cash refund. And that is obviously frustrating a lot of people who say that isn't actually true, that they did not cancel it and that they seem to have been forced into doing so. So there appears to be some shady stuff going on with how the airlines are handling these cancellations.
So people are, let me get this right. People are not canceling when they go and look at their flight. It says canceled.
That's correct.
Wow. So I think if it was me, I might assume, oh, my flight was literally canceled because they're not flying anymore. How much flying is still happening?
That's a good question. I mean, people are still flying. I mean, I've been hearing of absurdly cheap flights from some people that are continuing to travel. A colleague of mine's daughter recently returned from New Jersey to Los Angeles to quarantine herself with her parents, and she paid $26 to fly
What?
from Jersey to LA. Which, as somebody who used to make the trip from New York to LA regularly, I can tell you it's never $26.
No.
Um, so
$26 and your life potentially.
she's young, so I
How are
guess.
they? Are they wiping down the plane seats? The planes always make me feel kind of gross anyway. The guy right before
Yeah,
you could have sneezed on the tray table. Ah, disgusting.
yeah, I don't know. But so it's been an ongoing issue, and one that I've been hearing a little bit about. I've been kind of obviously in the midst of this, covering many different things that aren't always necessarily in my usual wheelhouse. And that was kind of a one-off thing, looking at what appears to be some customer kind of consumer abuse on the part of the airlines, although I'm waiting to see some more examples of this over time. Everything is
What
so
will
chaotic
happen if
right now.
to the airlines if more passengers don't fly soon in terms of their financing?
Well,
I'm not so worried about them. I think it might be good news. Oh, they can't run all those planes that destroy our environment. How terrible.
a lot of these airlines are saying, or there are airline analysts who are saying that the cost of keeping all of their employees on the payroll does not necessarily even match the unprecedented level of federal support that they would get under the stimulus bill.
Hmm.
So the thought is that if we don't reach a point where air travel is safe soon, and even if it is deemed to be safe, if the people are still fearful and that recovery doesn't come quickly, that they are probably going to have to issue a lot of layoffs anyway, that they won't be able to sustain their payrolls unless people start to fly once again.
If airlines continue to get bailouts from the federal government, should there be conditions on how they impact the climate? And what
I mean,
might
I certainly think so, and a lot of people that I've spoken to certainly think so. I mean, airlines are they make up about 3% of global emissions today, but that's a figure that is on pace to triple by 2050. It could be even more than triple. That some of those estimates that have come out appear to be conservative estimates, and so when the auto industry received a bailout a decade ago from the federal government. Part of what came of that is that in 2012 they had to agree to increased fuel mileage, which would have reduced the amount of oil that they used by billions upon billions of barrels. Now, it's notable the Trump administration is now trying to roll that back and issued a finalized rule last week that should, proposed replacing the standard that would have gotten 54 miles per gallon by on all new vehicles by 2025 and freezing it at a rate much lower than that. But that was still something that was agreed to as part of the bailout. So there are a lot of folks who would like to see airlines agree to something very similar. Uh, no sound coming from you. I don't know if you're muted or not.
Oh, thank you very much. There's so many environmental, I muted it so that you wouldn't have to hear my dry cough and everyone freak out.
Are you okay? Is
I
it
don't have,
allergies?
as far as I know, I'm good, but
Good.
So what would a future with less airline travel look like? And how would that affect the climate crisis?
It's a good question, although a difficult one to answer clearly. I mean, what I will say is that a lot of folks in the Green New Deal movement, for example, have been very particular about wanting to expand, high-speed electric rail and make it so that, like at no point are we going to not have or not want planes to fly us between, New York and Europe or New York and Asia or anywhere else that people want to travel and need to go by plane. I don't think that the answer is necessarily that, every time, you go to visit your cousin in London, you have to hop on a boat that takes a week or two to cross
Why
the
not? Let's slow it down. I
uh,
mean, I don't know. I remember when air travel was not something that people did all the time. And now that and then people would have to do it for business and it became, more lucrative, more affordable. It became the bus of the sky, shall we say,
mhm,
because it is fairly affordable if you can wait or you don't have to go on specific times and days.
mhm.
But now that we have Zoom and you don't need to be in LA for, the meeting,
Yeah.
why is it that we even need to continue our consumption patterns
Well,
the way that we have?
I think you can have reduced consumption patterns without having reduced availability of a means of travel, right? So you could, I think that this moment where people are relying so much more on services like Zoom or Google Hangouts or whatever, that they're the seriousness of telecommuting as an option, it will be well cemented after this. I mean, there's no way that won't become true of most work culture. So I hope that, unnecessary travel, which, you have to think of CEOs flying around in private jets to go to a meeting in one place and then come back for something else, that, that has to be among the most frivolous sources of this kind of pollution. So hopefully, that the popularity and advancements in telecommuting technology like this will replace that. But I think, in my view, the solution to most of this is, yes, scale back unnecessary travel like that, but don't make travel inaccessible. People like to travel, people have family in different places, and
But do they like it enough to kill their family? What with climate change? I mean, how much personal responsibility should we
well,
take?
but I don't think it's necessarily that either or kind of scenario, right? Like, I mean, I think what is being proposed around this is not, hey, we should cement what we have right now, which is people cloistered in their homes and people, unable to travel or do things like that, and instead replace that with, different types of low carbon alternatives to perform that same type of travel. So let me give you an example or a few. So, obviously here, one of the big things that we've been put that, like, the Green New Deal folks have been pushing for is for expanding and improving on the rail that we have already. It is insane that it is a frequent choice that people will make to fly between New York and DC or New York and Boston, but people do it, and the reason that people do it is because even though we have the best rail line in the Acela here, which doesn't exist in really any other part of the United States, it can still be slow. It can still be unreliable. And so people will choose to fly instead. And that should not be an option. That should not be, or that should not be a desirable choice. That like trains should be fast and should be accessible. I took my first high-speed rail earlier this year, in fact, when I was in Spain, and I went from Barcelona to Girona in like 40 minutes. It was so fast, it was so convenient, and it was very comfortable, and a much better ride than taking an airplane. So that should be an option. But that doesn't mean that you should always rely on terrestrial forms of transport either, because in Norway, for example, where they've had the highest degree of electric vehicle penetration of any other market. Kind of ironic for an oil producing state, but they've made a serious investment in it. They have made a law as of last year that by 2040, all short haul flights, so like a flight from Oslo to a smaller airport, have to be done by electric or hydrogen airplanes. So something that isn't going to be emitting the same, but is going to be traveling in the same way. And, right
That was
now,
going to be my next question. Are there
yeah,
technology things that we could do to, maybe continue to make it accessible, but at the same time, not destroy our environment?
and that there are many different startups around this. Since I first wrote a story about this a couple weeks ago, I've had dozens of startups reaching out to me. I haven't had the time to vet them all to see how legit they seem, but the very fact that there is such a diversity of these small companies that have are advanced enough that they have a public relations department, and they're spending money on that, is a sign that this is a burgeoning sector, and a sign that there's a lot of activity around this. And when I spoke to people in it, what they said basically is that, sure, there's a lot of people working on this. There's a lot of possibilities for how you can do this, but there just isn't the right system to incentivize it or to support it right now and help it to scale to a much larger system. Now, the way of doing that, you would think, would be to pressure the big airlines, who are the big buyers and the big polluters, and who eventually would need to adopt this kind of technology, to do so. And I think that this bailout would be an interesting opportunity to make those kinds of mandates and say, a certain percentage of your research and development has to go into supporting this type of research and development of technology, or by a certain year, you have to, all short haul flights have to hit a certain emissions target, meaning that it would require them to make that kind of investment in order to comply with that regulation by then. So there are a lot of things that you could do to help this along, and there are a lot of industries there that are, a lot of small companies there that are looking for that support. It's just about kind of making that connection.
So this brings me to the topic that you brought up a little bit earlier in terms of Trump's rolling back of emission standards on vehicles, right? So if we put some standards in for our airplanes, well, let's hope that whoever comes in continues to uphold those standards. We've seen that Donald Trump is not doing that with our vehicle standards. Is there any indication that car makers are still willing to, since they put all this money into less carbon footprint heavy vehicles, and that consumers want them, is there evidence that they will continue to make them even though the restrictions on them have been lifted or rolled back?
They'll have to. I mean, what is so befuddling about the Trump administration's proposal on this is that it is s- basing its argument on the fact that, or on the claim that automakers were not able to reach these levels of fuel efficiency in vehicles, that it was just unattainable to them. And half of the automakers have said that's not true. And we can certainly meet this. A certain, some other companies have have seen the advantage of getting behind the Trump administration on something like this. But what's notable is that the regulation that the Trump administration is seeking to replace simply brought the U.S. fuel economy standards in line with most of the rest of the developed world. So without this, and if the Trump administration's proposal is adopted as is, then the U.S. will be behind China, South Korea, Japan, and most of Europe. So, these same car companies are selling cars in those markets. So, if they are selling cars in those markets, they should be able to meet those standards. And it's simply in the US that we are giving them a pass and really lowering the common denominator for Americans. And I cannot fathom how anybody can support the idea that when they buy a new car, they will have to pay more money to fill it up with gas. But
Yeah, people aren't going to like that idea. No. Well, that's good. We're letting the market finally decide. Thanks, coronavirus. Coronavirus is letting the market decide. So, yikes. We tried to get you back here on the fly last week because of what was happening with Donald Trump's rolling back or deciding not to, you know, uphold EPA standards. Can you talk a little bit about what he did and what we're seeing? Are people dumping, paper mill products into our rivers already? Do you have any information about that?
Yeah, so basically, there have been a suite of policies that have come down from different agencies that I'm sure many of your viewers are familiar with the writer Naomi Klein, who kind of proposed this idea of shock doctrine, where industrialists or the forces of capital will use a natural disaster and the chaos surrounding it to push through really unpopular policies, usually around privatizing certain services or getting out of certain regulations. And that is certainly what has been the case here. I mean, so many of these agencies have been, you have the USDA basically experimenting with, doing privatized beef inspection. That's something that they decided to do in the midst of this for the first time. You have the Interior Department continuing to hold auctions for offshore drilling leases and schedule new ones for onshore drilling leases. You have the Bureau of Land Management making decisions on certain endangered species issues in the midst of this when everyone is distracted. And then at EPA, which has been really at the vanguard of a lot of the administration's rollbacks, they not only pushed forward on this auto emissions rollback, which is a huge deal, but they actually halted enforcement of their anti-pollution laws altogether. So the agents who actually go out and do the inspections and enforcement of different manufacturing plants or power plants to make sure that they are not dumping toxic waste, or make sure that their emissions are in line with what they report are their emissions. That is just not happening now. I have heard some things. I don't want to misreport something or scoop
Please,
myself on
please
here,
frighten and alarm us
but I will. But
with hearsay.
when I confirm this in the next week or so, I hope we will. You'll have me
We'll
back, and
discuss.
I'll get in depth about what I'm hearing. But it's the example I have in mind is pretty horrifying, and notably, I think I've talked on this show and on the radio show before this about a lot of my reporting in Puerto Rico. But there is, needless to say, that appears to be, at least from what I'm hearing, canary in the coal mines. So
Yes. Well,
that
we actually have some viewers from Puerto Rico in the chat right now. Carmen Julia Colon is here. Okay, so I guess we'll stay tuned and be terrified as well. Oh gosh, it's not great. Do you see activist groups still sort of converging and doing work to stop the Trump administration's rollback of these protections?
sure.
Or is everyone worried about, like, where are they going to get groceries?
People are, there are a lot of big and well-funded environmental groups, the Center for Biological Diversity, the NRDC, and all of these groups are, have really strong litigation arms. And so they have been continuing to file lawsuits. They have been continuing to file different types of paperwork and make complaints. So there certainly is that watchdog sector that is still at work to push back against this. But of course, it's hard to gain traction on these things, and it's hard to get attention on these things because everyone is so distracted with what's going on, and people are so scared, and it's a particularly chaotic
While
moment.
we're killing your grandparents, we're also killing the trees that you love, the land that you love, et cetera, et
Right.
cetera, et cetera.
Right. Yeah. Your grandparents should die, but also your kids are going to get cancer because, we're going to use
Dump.
pollute more during this time.
My head's gonna explode. Alexander Kaufman, senior reporter at HuffPost, coming on with us to give us the bad news. You can follow Alexander at alexckaufman.com. Alex, one question coming in from the chat. Are you drinking with an illegally obtained plastic straw?
Oh no, I am drinking with a metal reusable straw, as you can see,
Good
uh,
man.
that I got at an environmental conference, and I had not used until recently, but
Because you're stuck in the
up
house.
in a
And why
one-bedroom
not?
apartment, you start going through your stuff and finding new purpose for things.
Thank you so much. And thanks for the work that you do. We'll check back in with you in a couple of weeks. Thanks, Alexander.
Thanks for having me.
You're watching Act TV. If you're watching on YouTube, definitely, for interviews like this, hit the subscribe button. We come out with maybe 6 to 8 interviews every week, and as well as some witty banter, aimed at keeping us informed. And I think that's really important, but informed in not the way that's going to scare the hell out of you. Maybe depress you slightly, but also maybe a little more chipper than you used to. So if you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe here.